Welcome to Restless Heart Media, an apostolate of the Oblates of St. Augustine. It's thanks to our generous benefactors that we can provide you with this online content to inspire and nurture your growth in the interior life, and to preserve for the Church a traditional form of the Augustinian religious life. Mass is offered weekly for our generous benefactors, as well as our divine office and our daily sacrifices. To share in our mission and graces, you can visit www.oblatesofstaugustine.org/giving. God bless. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Angelus Domini nunciavit Mariae, et concepit de Spiritus Sancto. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesu. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Ecce ancilla Domini, fiat mihi secundum verbum tuum. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesu. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Et verum caro factum est, et habitabit in nobis. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesu. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Ora pro nobis Sancta Dei Genetrix, ut digni efficiamur promissionibus Christi. Oremus. Gratiam tuam quaesimus, Domine, mentibus nostris infunde, ut qui angelo nuntiante Christi Filii tui incarnationem coniovimus, per passionem eius et crucem ad resurrectionis gloriam perducamur, preemdum Christum Dominum nostrum. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right, I guess we should start with any questions from last week.
Yes, what am I doing here?
What did we talk about last week? Does anybody give me a recap?
Yes, we talked about realism, nominalism, universals.
Mm-hmm.
Nominalism is a rejection of the idea of universals.
Mm-hmm.
Without universals, you cannot really have science because you have to take everything as an individual.
Right.
There's nothing specific. Aristotle said there was universals and individuals,
Mm-hmm.
like man, and then Socrates as a man.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he has attributes that are specific to Socrates.
Mm-hmm. So any questions about those? The problem of universals, primary substances, secondary substances? Diana.
Question about position. I wrote, because I thought that's what I heard, there's no contraries or degrees in position, because it's just like sitting.
Yeah.
So could I just say like standing is the opposite of sitting, or is that like subjective?
I don't know. I mean, in one sense you could say, because you're relaxing and not relaxing, but then again, you're also laying down is also another degree of position, or it's also position between sitting here versus sitting there. I guess you could say you're sitting on the left side of the aisle versus the right side of the aisle. I mean, you get more specific, but I think in terms of an attribute of whether you're simply in a position of sitting, standing, whatever. I don't really know. I mean, they're so intricate. You know what I mean? All right, so physics. Who's done a little bit of the reading already? Who's read ahead? Anybody read ahead? Of course, Celeste has read ahead.
The assignment that you gave us, right?
Yeah, so yeah. Well, I mean, some people like to read ahead, some people like to read behind, only because, for me, I always prefer to actually read behind, because I found the lectures were like a key for me to understanding the actual reading. That's why I personally prefer to read behind, but other people like to read ahead, because they can retain more information from the reading, and then the lecture then clarifies whatever they read, so it's just a preference thing. Does anybody read ahead, or is everybody reading mostly behind?
The causes.
Yeah, I mean, well, the book 1, chapters 1 through 9 of physics. Okay, so Aristotle's Physics, book 1, chapters 1 through 9, forms the cornerstone of his natural philosophy, of the philosophy of nature, providing a systematic framework for understanding the principles that govern change, motion, and rest. Change, motion, and rest. 3 very important words in this lecture. in this topic: change, motion, and rest. Because everything that we're going to be talking about hinges on these three things: change, motion, and rest. Aristotle defines nature. I've already given a definition of nature. Does anybody remember it? What is nature?
The principle of motion or rest of a thing.
The principle of motion or rest in a thing, exactly. So Aristotle defines nature, or physis, hence physics, physis, as the intrinsic principle of motion and rest within entities, so within things. So what does intrinsic mean?
Natural, intrinsic, something that is natural to something.
Intrinsic.
It,
Really just take the suffix, or the prefix of it. What's the prefix of the word intrinsic versus extrinsic? In. It's within the thing. It's not outside of the thing. Because we're going to talk about, in terms of the causes, there are some that are extrinsic to something, and then there's things that are intrinsic. So these are two vocabulary words that we have to understand, intrinsic and extrinsic, to help place what Aristotle is talking about. So Aristotle defines nature as the intrinsic principle of motion and rest within entities, within things, distinguishing natural objects, such as animals and plants, from artifacts, like tables and chairs, things made by man, which lack such an internal principle. Which lack the internal principle. And we'll explain that later. These chapters establish the methodological and conceptual foundations for his inquiry into nature. Again, he's looking at this as a scientist, as, just sense experience, what can I know about things? Addressing the number and nature of principles, the reality of change, and the challenges posed by earlier philosophers such as Parmenides, Anaxagoras, and Empedocles. This lecture expands on Aristotle's arguments, his triadic model of principles: form, privation, and substrate. That's his motto: form, privation, and substrate. And his critical engagement with his predecessors. So in chapter 1, the methodological approach to natural inquiry. Aristotle opens book 1 by outlining the proper method for studying nature. The proper method for studying nature, emphasizing a progression from what is more knowable to us, such as something general, to what is more knowable by nature, such as first principle and elements. So, as I said before, Aristotle's science always begins with what's obvious, what's evident. Again, the only given is the fact that we have to assume that things exist, but that's evident to everybody, self-evident. So he begins with things that are, in a sense, macro, and he goes down into micro. So beginning with a human being and going all the way down to the cells of a human being, to the atoms that make us up. So there's different layers of this knowledge, but he always begins with what's evident, the things you don't need a microscope to figure out. So he argues that scientific inquiry should begin with observable wholes, such as living organisms or natural objects, which are more familiar to human perception, and proceed to their fundamental components. This inductive approach contrasts with starting from abstract universals, which are less immediately accessible. I always have to laugh when we're talking to someone who believes in like some sort of modern philosopher like Descartes or Immanuel Kant, because they always try to start with something that isn't immediately evident. They had to prove. Like, we can't know things in the way they are. Okay, prove it. Tell me I can't. They can't. But whereas Aristotle starts with something like, this table exists. It's a lot easier to prove, isn't it? So there's an advantage to starting with something that's observable versus just merely abstract principles. So Aristotle stresses that the study of nature focuses on entities subject to change. So things subject to change. That's where his focus is, on things that change. As nature is defined as the principle of motion and rest in things, inherent in objects, the principle of motion and rest. For example, a seed grows into a plant due to its internal nature, whereas a table moves, as we just moved the tables here before class, whereas a table moves only when acted upon externally. So a seed grows into a plant because of something internal to it, whereas a table is even built, made, because of something external to it. You see the differences here? This distinction sets the scope for his investigation, emphasizing that natural philosophy must account for the dynamic processes of change and stability in the natural world. So, in other words, it has to account for change. It has to account for change. Aristotle's methodological approach is rooted in empirical observation. What does empirical mean again?
Something you can measure, taste,
Exactly.
feel.
Something that I can figure out with my own senses. Reflecting his commitment to grounding philosophy in the study of the world as it appears. In the study of the world as it appears. Like I said, Immanuel Kant said we can't know the things in themselves. All we can know is the representations of those things in our mind, the things that our mind creates. Whereas Aristotle says, no, we can know the things in the world as they are. That's why it's called realism. It's very real, it's very practical. So he contrasts his method with that of his predecessors, who often began with speculative principles. Thales had this idea that water was the foundation of all matter, and then other philosophers. By starting with composites and moving to principles, so starting with things and moving to principles, so the inductive, something particular to something. You guys know the difference between deductive and inductive?
Say that again.
Deductive and inductive. Go ahead.
Say, doesn't deductive, it has something to do with observing from outside, or inductive, you're thinking?
So deductive, we call it deductive reasoning, is starting with something very, very general. So saying all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. So it goes from something general, all men are mortal, to knowing something in particular, Socrates is mortal. Does that make sense? So it's something general to something very particular. Whereas inductive is taking something particular, like looking at this dog here, and reasoning to know something about all dogs. So deductive goes from general to particular, and inductive goes from particular to general. Does that make sense? So Aristotle's approach also anticipates his later emphasis on causality, which is important too, as understanding the principles of change requires identifying the causes that govern natural processes. So I'll say that again. This approach also anticipates his later emphasis on causality, as understanding the principles of change requires identifying the causes that govern natural processes. And we'll hit that pretty hard today too, probably towards the end of the class. So chapter 2, the existence and number of principles. This one's actually kind of fun to think about. If this didn't really scare away, because I mean, of course, again, complicated translations, all that kind of stuff, it really comes down to just a few simple points. In chapter 2, Aristotle argues that to understand natural phenomena, we must identify the principles that govern them, which must be finite to ensure intelligibility, our ability to understand them, and coherence. I mean, if one thing that we want philosophy to be, right, is something that we can know, something intelligible and coherent. Makes it easy for us. He surveys the views of earlier philosophers, such as Thales, who posited water, as the single principle of all things. Or like Anaximenes, who proposed air, and Empedocles, who suggested 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water, governed by love and strife. These were the early Greek philosophers, okay? It seems, in one sense, it's almost as, nowadays we see it almost as crazy as thinking of like the Greek mythology of like Zeus and all that kind of stuff. It just seems really out there to me. I don't know if you feel the same way. But Aristotle critiques these monistic and pluralistic theories, noting that a single principle cannot account for the diversity of changes observed in nature, such as growth, alteration, or locomotion, movement. Similarly, an infinite number of principles would render explanation incoherent, as knowledge requires definite and finite structures. So if there are infinite number of principles, there's no way for us to actually begin our investigation because we don't even know where to start. If it's infinite, then it's infinite reality. It could be anything. It's almost like playing that game Wordle, and you get a word where there's like 20 different possibilities, and you're like, okay, I only got 4 chances. It's just a matter of guessing here. So Aristotle considers whether principles are one or multiple, and if multiple, whether they are finite or infinite. He rejects infinite principles, arguing that they would make scientific knowledge impossible by lacking determinate boundaries. Instead, he suggests that principles may involve contraries, like hot and cold, wet and dry, or a combination of contraries in an underlying substrate. What is a substrate? I mean, in technology, in the world of technology, I don't know if you're like with microchips or whatever else, and you're making some sort of circuit board or something. There's something called a substrate, isn't there?
I know substrate with rocks.
Yeah. Well, so what is this substrate in terms of geography, or
Isn't it like the foundation kind of?
just the underlying thing upon which something else is based? So, I mean, basically, it's like, rock bottom. So basically, like, we're in this massive room right now. I mean, we can change the way this room looks. We could put tables in here for a class. We could put tables in here for a dinner. We could just leave it empty for a dance. We could do anything, the substrate being the floor, accepting all of the elements of change. Does that make sense? This preliminary discussion sets the stage for his triadic model. Triadic just means three principles, his triadic model, as he begins to explore how principles can account for both the unity and diversity of natural phenomena, how it can account for the fact that one thing that is the same thing can change into different things. Does that make sense? So how a man can go from not being musical at all to being musical. You have the substrate being the man, you have him not being musically inclined to him knowing how to play music. So something that stays the same, and then there's an element that changes. Make sense? Okay. So chapter 3, he starts refuting his predecessors. So Aristotle addresses the Eleatic philosophers, particularly Parmenides and Melissus, who pose a significant challenge to the study of nature by denying the reality of change and plurality. Now, it seems far-fetched, but it's true. They deny that anything changes, that change is literally an optical illusion. Yes, it's laughable. I agree.
So the baby never grows up?
I guess not.
The mother never does anything.
Again, when you start from general principles and try to reason down to inductive in these things, you can come up with some of the certain things, which is why Aristotle was very, very practical when he started with something and says, yes, this happens. How do I explain it? So it's good to have your head in the cloud but your feet on the ground, so to speak. Okay. Parmenides argues that being is one. Being, B-E-I-N-G, is one, unchanging and indivisible, and that non-being cannot exist, making change impossible. I kid you not, when I was taking my ancient philosophy course in Rome, again, I barely knew Italian at the time because it was my first semester there. And I was trying to grasp, because I understood the sentences, but I was like, this can't be so easy to understand. It was partially Parmenides, and the teacher said, okay, this is Parmenides' philosophy. That which is, and that which is not. And I'm like, well, yeah, but where are we going from here? That which is, and that which is not. But as we'll see, Aristotle kind of, again, we went through terms at the very beginning of this class because terms are important. Again, we have univocal terms, we have equivocal terms, we have synonyms. So this is where Aristotle comes in and says, okay, we're using being, the word being differently here. So for Parmenides, if something comes to be, it must come from non-being, which he deems logically absurd because non-being doesn't exist. If non-being doesn't exist, then how can something come from non-being? Aristotle refutes this by demonstrating that being is not univocal, but has multiple senses. It has multiple senses, including substance, quality, quantity, and place. For example, when a man becomes musical, he transitions from being unmusical, a qualified non-being, to being musical, without involving absolute non-being.
What did you say? Being has multiple what?
Senses.
Senses.
So it's not an univocal, but equivocal. It has multiple meanings. So this distinction allows Aristotle to defend the reality of change without contradicting Parmenides' rejection of absolute non-being. Again, there's this term called Jesuitical. It's funny because it comes from the Jesuits and how they like to make a mess of things. But it's just the definition of Jesuitical: seldom affirm, never deny, always distinguish. Seldom affirm, never deny, always distinguish. And so here we're playing that game a little bit. Aristotle also criticizes Melissus for logical inconsistencies, such as assuming an infinite regress or an infinite magnitude without justification. By showing that being can be understood in multiple ways, Aristotle undermines the monistic claim that change and plurality are illusions. So monistic is everything is just one. Everything is just one. That's what a mono is, one. His argument hinges on the idea that change involves transition from states of being. States of being. So from sitting to standing, from standing to sitting, from states of being. There's obviously a change when someone goes from someone sitting to standing and then vice versa. So changes that between states of being, such as from potentiality to actuality. Potentiality to actuality, rather than the emergence of something from nothing. So Parmenides always thought that in order for there to be a change, something had to come from nothing. When Aristotle says, no, actually change is just going from this to that. Make sense? This critique is crucial as it establishes the philosophical groundwork for Aristotle's own theory of change, which relies on a persistent substrate, again, substrate, that thing that, ground level, the floor, a persistent substrate to maintain continuity through transformations. So through change, there's something always there that stays the same. In the previous lecture, we identified that as substance. The substance stays the same while all the other categories changed, right? So there's always something that stays the same, something that stays continual, something that's always there, and change is always, so to speak, accidental. Those that happen around it. So here we get to the fun part. Actually, it's all fun. Any questions?
The fact that you think it's fun.
I was thinking today, it's like they're not going to believe that, in order to become a priest, in order to offer the sacraments, like we got to go through all these classes and stuff. Like some people don't realize, the rigor that we have to go through. But anyway, Aristotle delves deeper into the question of how many principles govern change. Of course, he had that question, whether it's just one principle or an infinite number of principles. So he's like, how many? So the question is, how many principles? Considering whether there are one, two, or more. He rejects a single principle as it cannot account for the variety of transformations observed in nature, such as a seed growing into a plant, a man becoming educated, or water changing temperature. A single principle, like Thales' water, lacks the complexity to explain these diverse phenomena. Similarly, Aristotle dismisses an infinite number of principles, arguing that an infinite set would make explanation incoherent and scientific knowledge unattainable, as there would be no definite starting point for analysis. Like I said, when you're playing Wordle and there's a word and you had the word structure and it could be 20 different options and you got only 2 guesses, I mean, it's just a matter of guess. It's a matter of guessing. Aristotle proposes that there are likely 2 or 3 principles, ultimately favoring a triadic, 3, model consisting of 2 contraries. And those 2 contraries are form and privation. Form and privation. And an underlying substrate, so that thing that stays the same. You just substrate for continuity. For example, go ahead.
Form and privation.
Privation, Privation.
What does that mean?
To be deprived of something, to be without it. So like you have sight, the privation of sight is blindness. You have the organs to see, but there's some sort of physical defect in it, so you are deprived of the ability. So it's something that ought to be there, or something that can be there. So that's why actually we talked about potentiality and actuality. And potentiality and actuality are going to be a huge thing in his philosophy. So where am I? For example, in the change from an unmusical man to a musical man, the man is the substrate. Musicality is the form, and unmusicality is the privation. So musicality is something that can be there in the man. We could all sit here and study an instrument. It might take us some less time than others, but we're all actually capable of it. And so being that we're capable of it, if we're without it, that is the state of privation. We can have it, but we're without it currently. Does that make sense?
Kind of like this, trying to understand this.
Exactly. Right now you are in a state of privation from philosophy. But after this lecture, you will have the form of knowledge.
And then, but we have the substrate, which is we have the ability to eventually understand.
Because we have you, and we have all of this. So how exactly do we get to the form part?
well, you keep listening.
Keep listening.
And you study. So the substrate, the man, provides continuity, persisting through the change, while the contraries, form and privation, account for the transformation from one state to its opposite. This model allows Aristotle to explain change systematically, addressing both the unity of the changing entity, so the substrate, and the diversity of its states, the 2 states, form, privation. By limiting the number of principles to 3, Aristotle ensures that his framework is both comprehensive and manageable. How someone can be this smart in so early age, I have no idea, but hey. I mean, that really is a hallmark of wisdom, is to really categorize things.
Did he have a job? Or did he just sit around thinking?
No, well, he taught. His teaching was his job.
Teacher, he taught what's his name?
Alexander the Great.
Great.
Yeah, he was a private tutor.
And they sat around and talked about this all day.
I guess. Well, Aristotle also taught, in a sense, the natural sciences as well. I mean, he wrote books on animals and all that kind of stuff in math.
He realized that the sponge was an animal. No, really.
Wow.
He figured out, do you think the sponge is an animal?
I do.
Looking
I
at it?
actually do, because Tarpon Springs is known for sponges.
That's right.
Yes.
I mean, they're like the sponge capital of the world.
They also have great Greek food.
Yes, they do. And they had to come from something that they grow.
So he's
Okay, so chapter 5. The triadic model of principles. So Aristotle formalizes his theory of 3 principles: form, privation, and substrate, providing a robust framework for understanding change. He illustrates this model with examples such as a man becoming musical or bronze being shaped into a statue. In the case of the man, the substrate is the man himself. The form is musicality, as you said before, and the privation is unmusicality. Good job, guys. In the case of the statue, here's pop quiz. What's the substrate? A bronze statue. the bronze, the metal itself. The form is the what?
The form is the shape.
Is the shape. And the privation is what?
Not when it's just there, being ready to be made.
Exactly, the unshaped, the unshaped. So you can think of it like, I guess, Michelangelo's statue of David, how it was just a big, massive block of marble, and he had to get there and carve it out. So the marble would be the substrate. The privation would be just the unformed, just massive block of marble, and then the form itself would be the statue of David.
It would be the marble.
Exactly.
Pie dough.
The what?
Pie dough.
Pie dough.
Like
Pie
when,
dough.
like when you're cooking?
Dough.
Yeah.
To make
Pie.
a pie.
Exactly. So what the substrate would be the flour or dough. The privation would be just the blob of it.
Yeah.
and then the form would be the pie.
Crust.
There you go. Again, the substrate ensures continuity as it persists while the privation is replaced by the form during the change. So Aristotle distinguishes his view from predecessors like Anaxagoras, who posited a mixture of all things, arguing that a definite substrate is necessary for change to be intelligible. Anaxagoras' theory implies that everything contains a portion of everything else, leading to an infinite complexity that Aristotle finds explanatorily inadequate. Okay, what happens if everything contains a portion of everything else? If everything contains a portion of everything else.
If everything contains a portion of everything else, it can't be a substance because a substance doesn't contain anything except itself.
Correct. But even more on a practical sense, if something contains a portion of everything else, a substance can technically become anything else. Now, there's only one type of matter that can do that, and we'll talk about it later on in this class, this lecture. But it's actually, this is the one thing that is without experience that Aristotle defined, not from personal experience, but because it has to be there. It's matter without form, because eventually you have to get to that point where there's a matter without form. And that matter has to be able to take on any form. And so he calls that matter prime matter. Now, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but this was actually somewhat proven through scientists with Einstein's E equals mc squared, this mass energy thing, where eventually there's something so fundamental, so foundational to even the atoms, like a proton, neutron, electron, that even these things have to be accounted for. What are they made out of? Of course, there's this whole theory like wave-particle duality and all this kind of stuff, but ultimately you have to get to that one thing which is made out of nothing else. And usually when you get to something so foundational, you end up coming up with a co-principle, or two things that without each other cannot exist. So mass energy makes sense. But prime matter is what is the only thing really that could take on any form. Where am I? So instead, Aristotle's triadic model provides a clear structure. The substrate underlies the change, the form represents the end state, or what it finally becomes, and the privation represents the initial lack of that form. This model also clarifies that change does not involve absolute non-being, but a transition from a state of privation to a state of form. Make sense? So the difference between absolute non-being is like literally, well, ex nihilo, God creating something from nothing. Only he can do that. Anaxagoras thought that every bit of change came from non-being. Well, that's not the case. So the role of contraries in change, chapter 6. Aristotle examines the roles of contraries in change, noting that all transformations involve opposites, such as hot to cold, large to small, or unmusical to musical. He argues that contraries alone cannot account for change, as they are not substances capable of independent existence. So contraries alone cannot account for change, as they are not substances capable of independent existence. For example, hot and cold cannot exist without something that is hot or cold, such as water or air. A substrate is necessary to underlie the contraries, providing continuity during transformation. In the example of a man becoming musical, the man persists while the contrary states change. Aristotle also addresses the challenge of intermediate states, such as gray, between black and white, or lukewarm, between hot and cold. He suggests that intermediaries are composites of contraries, existing as mixtures or partial actualizations of the extremes. For instance, gray can be understood as a combination of black and white, and lukewarm as a combination of hot and cold. This explanation allows Aristotle to maintain his model of contraries while accounting for the complexity of natural changes. So in a sense that not everything, again, is a contrary. There could be some intermediate states, and still his model still accounts for these qualities. The substrate's role in grounding contraries ensures that change is both dynamic, involving opposition, or continuous, preserving identity. Make sense? I just saw a blank look. I was like,
Say that again, because that second part didn't make sense.
So the substrate's role in grounding contraries ensures that change is both dynamic, so involves at least two parts, involving opposition, and continuous, preserving identity, which is what the substrate does.
So change can be just, it doesn't sound, I get the first part, the dynamic part.
Mm-hmm. But continuous, there has to be one thing that remains the same, but otherwise,
So how does that make it change?
well, the one thing would be like you going from unmusical to musical. So what we have to account for is one, the unmusicality to the musicality, and also that there was something that went from unmusical to musical.
Okay.
So there's a continuous aspect of change, the one thing that goes from unmusical to musical. And there's also the two parts that go, the unmusicality and the musicality. So that's why there's the substrate, the form, and the privation. Make sense? Well, that's basically what it's saying. So chapter 7, distinguishing types of change. Aristotle distinguishes between two types of change. Substantial, the coming to be or passing away of a substance, for example, a seed becoming a plant, and non-substantial change, which are changes in quality, quantity, or place. For example, a man becoming taller, more educated, or moving to a new location. He argues that all change requires a persistent substrate to maintain continuity. This is probably like the 10th time I've said that today, so hopefully that sinks in. In substantial change, the substrate is matter, which takes on a new form. For example, bronze, the matter, becoming a statue. That's a substantial change. In non-substantial change, the substrate is the substance itself. For example, a man changing in quality or quantity. This distinction is critical as it allows Aristotle to explain both the creation and destruction of entities and the modification of their attributes. So eventually we have to, also remember, Aristotle didn't believe in a creation of the world. He believed that everything always existed. And therefore there was a finite set of matter, and so at a certain point the matter had to become something new.
Is that what we call like a first cause?
Yeah.
Yeah,
If a prime mover.
prime mover.
So Aristotle emphasizes that change is not from absolute non-being, but from a qualified non-being or privation. For example, when a statue is made from bronze, it comes from bronze that is not yet a statue, privation, rather than from absolute non-existence. This reinforces his rejection of Parmenides' view that change is impossible. So chapter 8, critiquing earlier theories of change. We're about to get to the fun part, guys. Of course, this has all been fun. Aristotle critiques the theories of change proposed by his predecessors, including the Eleatics, Anaxagoras, and Empedocles. It's all Greek to me, anyway. To highlight the strengths of his own model, the Eleatics, particularly Parmenides, deny change altogether, claiming that being is one and unchanging. Aristotle counters this by showing that change involves transitions between states of being, not the emergence of something from absolute non-being. Anaxagoras' theory of everything in everything posits that all substances contain portions of all things, leading to an infinite division that Aristotle finds problematic. This theory implies an infinite number of principles, which undermines explanation and coherence. Empedocles' theory of 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water, and 2 forces, love and strife, is also inadequate, as it fails to account for the full range of changes, particularly non-substantial change like alteration or locomotion. Aristotle argues that his triadic model of form, privation, and substrate is more explanatory, as it accommodates both substantial and non-substantial changes. The substrate provides continuity, the form accounts for the end state, and the privation explains the starting point, offering a unified and flexible framework for understanding natural phenomena. Okay, now we're getting to my favorite part. Any questions? Comments, concerns? Okay, chapter 9. Aristotle concludes Book 1 by introducing the concept of matter as an underlying nature that persists through change. Matter as the underlying nature that persists through change. Matter is the substrate that has the potential, again, potentiality, here we have. Matter is a substrate that has the potential to take on different forms. And change is the actualization of this potentiality. I'll say that again. He introduces the concept of matter as the underlying nature that persists through change. Matter is the substrate that has the potential to take on different forms, and change is the actualization of this potentiality. For example, bronze, which is the matter, has the potential to become a statue, form, and the process of shaping actualizes this potentiality. Make sense? Aristotle distinguishes between matter, the substrate, and form, the actuality, noting that privation is not a principle in itself, but a lack of form in the substrate. So I think I spoke about evil in last lecture, asking if it was real. And I said it's real, but a real absence, an absence of something that ought to be there, such as a privation. Evil is a privation of something good. This distinction is crucial as it allows Aristotle to explain both natural changes, for example, a seed growing into a plant, and artificial changes, such as crafting a statue. The concept of potentiality is central to Aristotle's framework, as it explains how change is possible without violating the principles of being. Matter's potentiality allows it to take on new forms, while its persistence ensures continuity. For instance, in the growth of a plant, the seed's matter has the potential to become a tree, and the process of growth actualizes this potential. Aristotle's emphasis on matter and potentiality anticipates his, big word here, hylomorphic theory. What is hylomorphic? Well, I guess the rest of the sentence explains it. Which integrates matter and form to explain the composition of natural things. So hylomorphic just means you have matter plus form, essentially. Hylomorphic, just big fancy word.
How do you spell?
Hylomorphic. Hylomorphic. There's matter plus form. To explain the composition of natural things, setting the stage for his broader metaphysical and physical inquiries. So as a kind of a summary of that portion of the lecture, in Book 1, chapters 1 through 9 of physics, Aristotle establishes a systematic framework for understanding nature by identifying 3 principles: form, privation, and substrate, that govern change and motion. And what is nature? The principle of motion or rest in a thing. His inductive method, and what is an inductive as opposed to deductive?
Particular general.
There you go. Particulars general. His his inductive method, which progresses from observable composites to first principles, provides a practical approach to natural philosophy by critiquing the monism of Parmenides, the mixture theory of Anaxagoras, and the elemental theory of Empedocles. I'm sure I pronounced that name 3 different times or different ways each time. Aristotle defends the reality of change and plurality, arguing that a persistent substrate underlies all transformations. The introduction of matter and potentiality sets the stage for his hylomorphic theory. Again, matter plus form. I said theory and Siri said I think I said Siri. Anyway, the introduction of matter, okay, I read that, which integrates matter and form to explain the natural world. This comprehensive framework, rooted in empirical observation and critical engagement with earlier philosophies, makes Book 1 a foundational text for Aristotle's natural philosophy in the study of nature. So I'm going to give you guys a 10-minute break only because we got a major part coming up next about the 4 causes. The causal model. The causal model. Now, I've given you this paper with different examples of the causal model, only because the causal model is precisely a model because it's an analogy. It's a drawing to try to help us understand basically what is not maybe immediately intuitive by our sense experience. Like nobody looks at a human being and says, oh, you're made of form, matter, agent, cause, and final cause, But nevertheless, when we consider these things, as we've seen Aristotle do, when he arrives to the point of saying that these are 4 causes for why a thing is what it is, it makes complete sense. So for purposes here, a model will be taken to be an analog or analogy that assists or promotes the gradual understanding of something not readily grasped in sense experience. So this will help our empirical knowledge a little bit. So the 4 factors involved in the causal model are usually identified as matter, form, agent, and end. You kind of see it in the diagram, the top one. Matter, form, agent, and end. And the way they're usually referred to is material cause, formal cause, efficient cause, and final cause. So the 4 causes: matter, form, agent, end. But then when you refer to it as a cause, it's the material cause, the formal cause, the efficient cause, and the final cause. Now the final cause is usually also called the telos, the Greek word for end or purpose, and usually you hear it referenced in teleology. So regarding the causal model, what we're going to be investigating here is where are these causes actually exist in a thing, which is why I wanted to emphasize in the first part of this lecture of the terms intrinsic and extrinsic. So for your notes right now, these 2 will be our intrinsic The next 2 will be our extrinsic for artificial things. But then for natural things, this is going to come back into question. Where are these two causes? Where are the efficient cause and where is the final cause? Do things that are natural, organic, so to speak, and also inorganic, but things that are not artificial, do they have an efficient cause? Do they have an agent that makes them? Do they have a final cause? Where do we see final causality? So if the matter or material cause of a natural entity is the stuff from which it is made, which remains in it, precisely what that stuff is invites clarification. Comparison with the artificial analogy will help show the difficulty here involved. If we were asked to identify the material out of which a chair is made, we would reply oak, or perhaps cherry, or oak, wood, or perhaps something even more specific, cherry oak, or whatever, whatever specific type of wood. The substance used in making the chair remains in it and is observable without the incidental changes of position, temperature, and treatment it might undergo. You just see it. The material that underlies the chair is open to introspection, and indeed can often be identified as having a nature in its own right, say that of an oak. So when we make artificial things, we can only make them out of things that already exist. Make sense? We can't create ex nihilo from nothing, but we can take things that exist and, in a sense, repurpose them. But of course, one thing that we'll get to here soon is the fact that when we want to make something artificial, when we want to make something, we're a carpenter, we want to make something, actually this happens a lot with carpenters especially, whenever they want to make a particular thing or furniture, what's usually one question they ask themselves regarding, how to begin? You need the materials. What's one question they might ask themselves? What type? What type of wood? Because different woods have different strengths, have different qualities. Even to the point of receiving stains, some woods are better for making nicer than other ones. Some woods are stronger than other ones. And so even the carpenter will have to ask, for what purpose am I going to make this chair for? And therefore, he has to ask himself, which type of wood is able to receive the form that I want to give it? So already the material thing has to be receptive to a new form. Does that make sense? So Aristotle spoke of the ultimate material component of natural entities, a Greek expression meaning protomatter, or first matter. He thought of it as a type of conservation principle that persists through all natural changes in the universe. Surprisingly, scientists have come to develop a similar conception in recent years. No longer do they attempt to identify one final substance, a single superquark, for example, that is the ultimate building block of the universe. Instead, their emphasis is on delineating factors that are conserved in all transformations that take place in the world of nature. Such conservation principles have been known and investigated for some time. They have been successfully formulated as a conservation of matter, energy, mass, and finally, after Einstein's discovery of mass-energy equivalence, E equals mc squared, which is mass energy. Perhaps the last named mass energy comes the closest to conveying the Aristotelian idea of protomatter as the basic stuff of the universe. So like I said before, eventually we have to get to just something that's there without form that can receive any type of form. So form as nature. Returning to the causal model based on our artifact, the chair, we note that its form is intimately related to its matter, in the sense that the form is a shape or figure the matter assumes during the chair's manufacture, and becomes, as it were, a part of its being. Moreover, although the wood, say oak, was not always formed as a chair, as long as it was identifiable as oak, it was always seen under one form or another. And from this point of view, the two, matter and form, seem quite inseparable. one might think from this correlative status that both are equally unintelligible, that just as there is something mysterious about the basic matter of the universe, so the forms it assumes or to which it is united are difficult to grasp as well. This is not exactly the case, for though matter is to a large degree refractory to the human mind, form is surprisingly intelligible. It provides a window through which the world of nature is seen, and through which many of the natures that inhabit it can be readily understood. I understand that was a little bit complex. I'm reading a little bit to you from my textbook that I used in my undergraduate studies in natural philosophy. But one thing that's interesting that he's bringing up in this is that the oak already had a form. The wood already had a form, okay? So how is it that it's possible now that it can become a chair?
You have to do something to it.
We change the form through action.
Is it no longer oak?
It's still oak. Substance is still there.
Okay, so in other words, he's saying that there are things that are capable of receiving more than one nature. More than one nature. And this is actually the idea of the last figure 1-4, bottom right corner of your page there, because eventually we're going to have to get to the idea of a human being. Now, a human being is obviously organic, it has an animal nature. But then you also superimpose upon that also a new nature, a human nature, a rational nature, since the definition of a human is what? A rational animal. A rational animal. But also animals also have certain instincts and processes of nutrition that also likewise exist in plants. So there are actually three types of organic souls, so to speak. The vegetative, the sensitive, which is for animals, and the rational. Three types of souls. And the way this works also is hierarchical, in the sense that plants have also obviously a vegetative soul, but they don't have that which is unique to sensitive souls, the animal souls. They just have the plant. But the animal, because he needs to produce his own nutrition, obviously you take in food and then your body works and abstracts nutrients from the food that the animal ate. It has all of the characteristics of that which plants have. Obviously there's no what do you call it, chlorophyll or photosynthesis or whatever. I mean, different way of receiving nutrients. But nevertheless, it has the same, within it, the nature also of a vegetative soul. Does that make sense? So in the diagram, as you'll see, on the very bottom left, in this circle right here, you have the PM, the protomatter. And you have that which, again, is just matter that has the potential of receiving any form. Then the next one, it's more or less 4 squares put together by a dotted square. That represents the vegetative soul. And so anything that is on the right acquires anything that is on the left-hand side, but it does not have anything that's on its right. Does that make sense? So the next one there, NF, I guess it's A, is the animal soul, the sensitive soul. And then, of course, that contains both the vegetative soul and then the prime matter, the natures of the two previous forms. And then the last one on the far right it's just 2 blocks, is the rational soul, is a human being. And, of course, it has all of the above, or all the ones on the left. And so that's what's pretty unique in this concept of forms, is because we all contain even more forms, more natures, so to speak. And even when regarding forms of things, think too, we're made up of so many different systems. You have a digestive system, a circulatory system, a respiratory system, and each organ in of itself, it's its own thing. But what happens when you separate that organ from the bigger thing that it belongs to? But both the bigger thing maybe not a kidney or whatever. I mean, you can go with that one. What's that one that doesn't really matter? The gallbladder?
Gallbladder, yeah. Gallbladder.
Yeah, exactly.
And the spleen.
Yeah, exactly, those things. So there's, interchangeable parts, I guess. So that doesn't really, obviously kill the bigger organism. But there are those that are vital, those that do.
But it makes it not function as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, yeah. So there, even in in a form of an object, there are even smaller forms within it. But they're so integrated in the bigger form that they almost become essential to it. So much so that we even see this with organ transplants. So what's the number one cause of someone who receives an organ transplant? What causes their death?
Oh, rejection.
And what does rejection mean?
Body actually attacks the organ.
The body attacks the organ. The body recognizes it's a foreign entity, and so it attacks it. So even the bodies recognize that this doesn't belong to me. This isn't mine. This isn't part of my form. Even though there's some functionality for a few years that can exist, we can see that this model even proves true with these sorts of natural sciences. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm gonna give this. There's like 30 pages here of notes that I'll shoot to you in the emails as well, so you can read them. Again, he's a brainiac. He's very scientific in his methodology, but that's why I'm trying to, in a sense, break it down. So now we get to the interesting part: nature as agent. So like we've used the example already that when there's a carpenter, okay, the material cause is the wood, the formal cause is chair, agent cause, efficient cause. Who's the one putting it together? The carpenter, obviously. So, but that's extrinsic to the chair. That's outside of the chair. It's not within the chair. It's something outside of it. So when we're talking about nature, where is agency? Where is the efficient cause in nature, in organic nature? So moving now to the third explanatory factor in our causal model, the agent or efficient cause, we may inquire what analogy there is in nature that corresponds to the maker of the chair in the case of the artifact. Here it is important to stress that the making of the chair is an activity of the maker, and as such is readily correlated with a capability that pre-exists in the maker and in the proximate cause of his activity. A general principle is latent in the example, operations and activities, and reactivities as well, which is what the chair to receive, or the wood to receive the form of a chair, and the carpenter's ability to make the chair. Proceed from abilities and potentials that are lodged in the natures of agents, so can serve to explain the ways in which they act and react with neighboring objects. That's just a fancy way, a very fancy way of saying, in order for a carpenter to make a chair, he has to be able to make a chair. You know, he has to have that potential in order to actualize it. And of course, the wood has to be able to withstand someone sitting on it, you know, and nails going through it and holding. So the pre-existing already in these things have to be the possibility. Does that make sense? It is the ability of one substance to act on another that explains why it is possible to identify agents and reagents, or those that receive the agency, in the order of nature. Now, man is a natural organism that possesses many powers and capabilities, and on this account, he can serve as a paradigm for the investigation of agencies in nature. It is natural for man to think and to will, to speak and to write, even to dream. But these distinctively human activities, while providing an insight into his nature, are not the focus of attention at this point. Being perfective of man's mind rather than his body, they are not particularly helpful for seeing how his body can act on other bodies, and thus serve as an efficient cause. A carpenter's making of a chair, on the other hand, illustrates a natural agent at work on another body, forming its material into a useful artifact. This primitive aspect of the man-maker, the homo faber, could be extended indefinitely as one ranges through all the constructive, mechanical, and industrial arts, the feats of engineering, the products of technology. Man is a powerful agent who acts directly and indirectly on the substances around him. So we could also see this in the animal kingdoms. This is what he's ultimately getting to. We make technology. Birds make nests. Beavers make dams. Similar instances can be adduced in the animal and plant kingdoms. Beavers build dams, birds are nests, and spiders are webs. And in all these natural activities, they use or affect objects with other natures to the benefit of themselves and their species. Animals give birth to young and plant and plants bear seeds, thus serving as agents for bringing new organisms into the world. And though the balance of nature, all living organisms in their life processes are so many agents that interact with their environment and produce changes in other things in the course of their development. Make sense? So we see agency in nature. I mean, he really just could have said, man makes cake and birds make nests. But they have to give us things to read. They need to give us homework, right? You can't just have the students comprehend something and then just send them home just already knowing the stuff. You have to have something to charge them money for. Okay. So nature as end. Nature as end. This one's actually pretty interesting. Of course, I said all this is fun, right? This brings us to the fourth and final factor in our causal analogy, the end or final cause. The Greek word for end is telos, source of the term teleology. So that with this type of cause, we come to the thorny question of teleology in nature. What is the purpose? What is the end of nature? Since the time of Aristotle, it has been almost axiomatic that nature acts for an end. Aristotle introduces a notion in chapter 3 of the second book, which we haven't gotten to yet in physics, where he defines end or final cause. He then applies it to nature and its activities in chapter 8 of that book. In this particular textbook, the author accepts the idea of evolution. Now, there's always been a heated debate amongst Catholic philosophers and theologians about evolution, largely stemming from Pope Pius XII, who tried to give a non-answer regarding evolution, saying, sure, man could have evolved from monkeys, but there was still a particular time when God inserted a human rational soul into the monkeys for them to become human. Of course, all of this is just supposition without proof. I mean, there are people, I don't know if it's true, but there are people who say that the chicken is the descendant of the Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yeah, dinosaurs.
You have the bones of the dinosaurs, we have chickens, and nothing in between. Major problem. There are sciences that insist, biologists that insist on evolution, but again, there's still gaping holes in the actual evolutionary process. And of course, there are actually, again, this is still debatable as Catholics. There's a Thomistic philosopher named Etienne Gilson. He taught at the University of Toronto. Very prolific in writing books, very well respected in academia. He wrote a book about evolution and how it precisely violates final causality. Precisely because in order for a dinosaur to become a chicken, he has to already possess in his form, which is where I'm getting ahead of myself, where the final cause exists in when it comes to our personal natures. It has to possess already a chicken inside of it. It has to already be potentially a chicken. Because you can't, one of the principles of causality is you cannot have something greater in the effect than in the cause. So like an atomic bomb, the destruction it causes, all that energy that is released was already contained in the bomb. It was already there. The energy was there, it was just being released. So even though a bomb can look like there's something greater in the effect than in the cause, in reality, no, it's just a dispersion of the energy that was there. So there's nothing greater in the effect that can be in the cause. And so if you can get a squirrel from a non-squirrel, or a chicken from a dinosaur, it must mean that whatever came afterwards was already contained in it beforehand. Does that make sense? So this is why this particular final causality poses a huge problem for evolution. Now there's certain things like adapting to your habitats and all that kind of stuff, requiring different attributes, but it's not a massive substantial change.
Moths in London.
Yeah.
Adaptations, though.
Exactly. But they use a funny different word. They try to use it as more proof, so they call it like microevolution.
Yeah, microevolution.
It's like, okay, but that's not what we're talking about. When we're talking about evolution, we're talking about like getting a squirrel from a non-squirrel, getting a chicken from a T-Rex. Let's see. If evolution is viewed as a natural process, does this also entail that it is a theological process, one that is goal-directed in the sense that higher and more developed species are not merely the result of chance, but were somehow determined to advance? There is no easy answer to this question, but it's very asking enables one to reflect on ends or final causes and how these may be operative within the world of nature. So here's where we get to the fun part of final causality. Because of course, in the world of Aristotle, as I said earlier, it's kind of a hallmark of wisdom to be able to categorize things, to be able to make distinctions. And so the way Aristotle attacks this is by saying, well, what does end mean? What does finality mean? Any guesses? What does end mean? That's the first one. The terminus, the termination. So what does this mean? You just said the word. So if I'm going from here, St. Petersburg, to Tampa, Tampa's my terminus. That's my end. That's my destination. That's where I'm going. So from point A to point B. Now, in terms of natural things, one can simply say that the terminus, the end, the final causality, is simply a baby growing up into an adult. The terminus. This is what it reached its full product of its growth process. Does that make sense? Yeah. So a caterpillar turning into a butterfly.
Yes, I was trying to figure out how you do that before.
With the what?
From a caterpillar to a butterfly, starting as an egg. I was trying to figure out how you would do that. I was not seeing that.
What's actually kind of funny here is we had talked about monsters. Monsters. So I'll read it just because it's just here. Monsters occasionally occur, but with astounding regularity. Mosquitoes generate other mosquitoes, squirrels other squirrels, and so on. In this way, nature is more than an inner source of change and activity. It is also a source of permanence and stability. When such stability terminates a natural process, whether inorganic or organic, it is the end of the process, and as such, its final cause. So it's actually true, like in our spiritual manuals, for baptism, it's actually kind of, it's just interesting. Just life, right? I came to the paragraph talking about what if you look at something that came from a human, but you can't tell if it's human? Can you baptize it? Talking about monsters. Like literally something came out that is just a little different.
Does that really happen?
I've never experienced it. A second meaning of end or goal adds to the idea of terminus the notion that, what other notion? So this is just talking like, going from a child to an adult. But what might we also call the end or purpose? Maybe think along the lines of morality, ethics, behavior. If you grow up to be a bank robber and mass murderer, do we say that this person reached their full potential as a human being? No. So there's this aspect of another meaning of end or purpose, a perfection to be achieved. And perfection, meaning, a lot of people think perfect in the sense of like taking an exam where you have 100 questions and you get all 100 right. Perfection. If you only get 99 of them right out of 100, imperfect, albeit just one. So people have this idea, and this is also the same thing with morality, have this idea of perfection being you make mistakes. But the perfection here is not a scorecard. It's not a scorecard. It's a thing becoming what it ought to be. A thing becoming what it ought to be. And so this is why no matter how many sins you commit, you can still become perfect, because you can still become who you were created to be through grace. And I think this is actually one of the fundamental differences between, actually is one of the fundamental differences between, that I find why, in a sense, Protestants can't grasp the Catholic notion of perfection, of sanctification. Because Martin Luther said that God's grace, we are dung, and God's grace covers us as white with snow, and so when God looks at us, all he sees is the snow, that we're perfect, but truly underneath we remain dung. Whereas in Catholic theology, no, grace actually transforms that dung into snow. That dung into snow. And so it's a matter of, again, the way I've been preaching on Sundays is we have to let God do this work. God does this work. The Holy Ghost does this work in us. But we have to, mortify ourselves, discipline ourselves in order to detach ourselves a certain sense from the world. We have to do our part. But nevertheless, it's him who changes our heart, our priorities, and everything else, so that by his inspirations, by his impetus in our hearts, his indwelling in the Holy Ghost, he begins to lead us to do good things, to respond to situations a certain way that was differently than the way we did before. Because obviously, if I just want to make a whole bunch of money, I'm going to gear all my actions towards that. So if someone's going to get between me and $1, well, I'm going to get rid of this guy. But if I detach myself from the glory of this world, consider more my eternity, my eternal salvation, more so than just the quantity of money in my bank account, I'm going to start making decisions differently. How did I get off on this rant? You guys distract me. Oh, perfection, that's right. Okay. So yeah, anyways, perfection, what it means to be a human being. So, in terms of this, a good squirrel runs around, collects nuts, gets chased by Chewie. A good Chewie chases squirrels. So the third meaning of end is more specialized still, because it adds from terminus to perfection one more thing. Aim. Actually, I should put it here. Intention. Aim or intention. This serves to identify the type of final causality found in cognitive agents, humans. I wake up this morning, I'm proud of myself, I'm a cognitive agent. Animals and humans are natural agents of this type. Many of their activities are planned or intended in advance, and so can be seen as end-directed from their beginning. A person building a house or a bird a nest must have in advance some notion of what is intended, for otherwise neither builder would know how to gather the materials. There seems to be a difference in the two cases, however, for the bird does its work by instinct, intends to make the nest in a form that is predetermined by its species, whereas a man is not so limited and can generate the multiplicity of dwellings recorded in human history. I always get a crack at this because I see this very much in Chewie, two ways. Give him a bone, he tries to, he doesn't have a cover or anything to bury the bone in. He just sets it on the carpet, and with his nose tries to sweep the carpet over the bone. Yeah. He's got these instincts to bury it, but he obviously doesn't have the instincts to realize that he needs certain materials in order to do it properly. What's also funny, he's a little chihuahua. I'm taking him a bath, I take him a bath in the sink, right? Because you don't need a bathtub for this little guy, probably drown in it. So I turn on the faucet and I hold him there under the running water. And what does he start to do? Pedal. Like, Chewie, you're not in the body of water, man.
Say he tries to drink the water.
I thought so too.
No, he's just a reaction. He's soaking wet, and so pedal. So much of the difficulty with teleology, final causality, arises from conceiving all final causality as intentional or cognitive, and not sufficiently differentiating the cognitive from the terminative and perfective. So you see how this is found in obviously human beings are natural things, we're organic things, so are animals, but by instinct, more so than a cognitive ability. There are also these other types of final causality that are also in nature, that are still also intrinsic to the actual thing. Make sense? So, and then here's another thing regarding intelligence. The word intelligence, however, can take on a variety of meanings, as is clear from the way one talks of artificial intelligence in the present day. Perhaps in the latter way of speaking, one could say that the double helix is programmed to replicate in a certain way, and so knows how to do it, but is programmed to replicate. So we pretend it knows, or we use the word knows. Or that an asteroid knows how to find its path through the solar system without performing the calculations we make to predict its path. In this sense, natural agents seem to foreknow what they aim to achieve, and so implicitly substantiate the claim that nature acts for an end. Now it just makes everything more complicated for more complicated discussions, more so than this. But the next thing he goes on about, which I think I'm going to end here actually. Again, we can go on for pages and pages and pages. And I'll send this to you guys in the email. He talks about necessity in nature. Necessity in nature. Now, why would we find this to be important to see? I mentioned it before. You don't get a non-squirrel from a squirrel or a squirrel from a non-squirrel. And because this class is designed to make everyone woke-proof, I guess the two biggest things that are often used in politics, and again, I say this not to make any judgments on anybody in particular, but they're the two biggest things that are probably on every single ballot. Every single ballot. One is the LGBTQ stuff, and the other is abortion. Now, people say, I'm going to follow the science. It's not really a human being until a certain process in gestation and the pregnancy, these sorts of things. Of course, science would also say, once a living organism is a living organism, it meets the definition of a living organism. So it has human DNA, it's a human. That we know by science. But regarding the four causes, when we're talking about the inherent dignity of a unique, unrepeatable human being. At what point, according to this philosophy, not theology, according to this philosophy, at what point would we say that zygote, that embryo, that fetus, whatever, becomes that unique, unrepeatable human being? When would it have to? And why is that?
Because matter and form together.
Exactly. Once the matter and form are together, that form is there, that person's there, the rational soul is there. The only thing that's prohibiting from it demonstrating to us that it's rational is the fact that its physical capabilities, like I talked about sight and blindness. At a certain point, or at this point, it's still deprived of the material expression of expressing itself rationally, right? But nevertheless, because the form's there, you have this final causality here. this perfection, this terminus, that it's going to become eventually a fetus, which Latin just means child, and or rather offspring, and will eventually become what is physically noticeable to us as a child, as a human being. But in order to get there, it had to already be that. Like I said, like what I was saying earlier, you don't get a chicken from a dinosaur unless a chicken already exists in the form of a dinosaur, within its form, because there can't be something greater in the effect than in the cause. So you can't get a human being out of something that's non-human, literally in the process of growing. Okay? So again, switching to the other thing, the alphabet people. The removal of body parts and throwing on some makeup. Is a woman something that's part of the nature or substance of a human person?
Yeah.
Yes. And so just altering some sort of physical part, does that change the form? Does that change the substance? No. You are what you are. That's it. And
Unless they can change the DNA.
well, that's the thing. You know, I had one.
No.
Someone one time pressed me. But what if? What if you could? What if you could change the DNA? What if you could turn a man into a woman into man? And I looked at him and says, "This is a hypothetical question. And with every hypothetical question, you can only answer it if there is a strong connection to reality. If a strong connection to reality. Because if there is no strong connection to reality, and we're playing this hypothetical game, we can literally say anything goes. If a man could become a woman, I could become a chicken. I could become a dinosaur. There has to be an actual connection or a possibility, a contingency connected to the question. But given the fact that our genders are actually part of our substance, our personhood, that can't change any more than you can become me, or me you. We can't just swap. I mean, there was those TV shows back in the 90s, like, a guy going into a girl's body or whatever, and knowing that he was formerly that guy, but living life as this other person or whatever. Now looking back, obviously, I see that there was kind of disrupting our minds a little bit, but
Sort of probably prepping for this.
brainwashing us, yeah, to accept the reality that you could be born in the wrong body or something like that.
It's so logical that I don't understand how people can think otherwise, because the logic is.
The logic is there if you're, again, a realist. But say if you're Immanuel Kant, and you can't know the things outside and of themselves, what truth is how it's filtered through your mind. And so truth becomes subjective. The truth isn't a relationship with the mind, with reality. Truth is simply what you think it is. And so if you think you're something of the opposite sex, then for you, if you believe in that reality is merely subjective, then to you that's real.
We used to call that insanity.
It is. But the thing is that each and every single person can come up with their own truth and have their own truth. We have to say truth is relative. I think I brought this up one time in class. Truth is relative.
Right.
But it's a self-defeating statement. Because to say truth is relative would have to be true for everyone. That makes truth absolute.
That means it can't be relative.
Exactly. So it immediately contradicts itself. And this happens when you follow René Descartes, Immanuel Kant, and all the modern philosophers, because even up to the existentialists, Martin Heidegger, all these people, for them, truth was also their relationship, their feelings about the world, which is also what gets into Vatican II and the principle of vital immanence, synodality. We have to. Every moral question is up for grabs now, because we all have to come together and talk about our lived experience. Once you start applying lived experiences to morality, you've already lost objective morality. You've already lost the question of what does it mean to be man, through actual realism, from looking at things as they are. Which is why what's going on, specifically in Rome, is something incredibly evil and contrary to everything that the church has been thinking for centuries. I don't know if you saw, but recently, actually just yesterday, the USCCB, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, approved a translation of the Bible that has a heart on it, with rainbow flag, LGBTQ+, that literally took every single condemnation of sodomy and just called it, reworded as illicit relationships between two men. So it made all the language softer. Translation of sacred scripture. The USCCB. The USCCB. Bizarre. But yeah.
That's because a lot of them are that way.
Oh, that
course.
way.
Oh, we don't, yeah, it would,
Most of them are probably that way.
yeah, no. I'm not going to bash him too much because there'd be too much material and be here all night. So any questions?